Vishnupad Paramahamsa Parvajakracharya Astar Sata Shri Srimad. His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada Ki Jai. Ananta Koti Vaishnavrinda Ki Jai. ISKCON Founder Acharya Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Namacharya Srila Haridas Thakur Ki Jai. Prem Sko Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shri Vasadi Gaur Bhaktivinoda Ki Jai. Shri Shri Radha Krishna Go Gopinath Shamakunda Radha Kunda Giri Govardhan Ki Jai. Vrindavan Dham Ki Jai. Mayapur Dham Ki Jai. Jagannath Puri Dham Ki Jai. Dwarka Dham Ki Jai. Ganga Mai Ki Jai, Yamuna Mai Ki Jai, Srimati Tulasi Devi Ki Jai, Gaur Premananda, Samaveda Bhaktivinda Ki Jai. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to Sri Sri Guru and Gauranga. Glories to Srila Prabhupada. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 3, Chapter 16, Jai and Vijay, cursed by the sages. Today we're going to do texts 33, 34, and 35. Texts 33 and 34 have no purport, so I'll read the Sanskrit and the translation for those two verses by myself, and then we can chant text 35 together. So text 33. Tell something wrong? Oh. So which verse are we doing today? Just 35. Okay. Okay, text 35. Taveva Yaduna Prapto Parshada Pravaro Hare Diter Jatara Nirvishtam Kashyapam Teja Ubanam Taveva Yaduna Prapto Parshada Pravara Hare Diterja Tara Nirvishtam Kashyapam Teja Ubanam Taveva Yaduna Prapto Parshada Pravara Hare Diterja Tara Nirvishtam Kashyapam Teja Ubanam Taveva Yaduna Prapto Parshada Pravara Hare Diterja Tara Nirvishtam Kashyapam Teja Ubanam Taveva Yaduna Prapto Parshada Pravara Hare Diterja Tara Nirvishtam Kashyapam Teja Upanam Taveva Yadruna Prapto Parshadal Prabharo Hare Devtam Yuvishtam Kashyapam Teja Upanam Nirvishtam Kashyapam Teja Upanam. Vaishnavis Tavevyadana Prapto Pasaral Prabharo Hare Yutirjitara Nirvishtam Teja Upanam Tavevyadana Prapto Ashvam Bhagavan Hare Tirjitara Nirvishtam Kashyapam Teja Upanam. Tau, those two doorkeepers. Eva, certainly. He addressed. Aduna, now. Praptau, having gotten. Parshada Pravarao, important associates. Hare, of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Dite, of Diti. Jatara, womb. Nirvishtam, entering. Kashyapam, of Kashyapa Muni. Tejaha, semen. Upanam, very strong. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. Translation. Lord Brahma continued, those two principal doorkeepers of the personality of Godhead have now entered the womb of Diti, the powerful semen of Kashyapa Muni, having covered them. Purport. Here is clear proof of how a living entity coming originally from Vaikuntha Loka is encaged in material elements. The living entity takes shelter within the semen of a father, which is injected within the womb of a mother, and with the help of the mother's emulsified ovum, the living entity grows a particular type of body. In this connection, it is to be remembered that the mind of Kashyapa Muni was not in order when he conceived the two sons, Hiranyaksha and Hiranyakashipu. Therefore, the semen he discharged was simultaneously extremely powerful and mixed with the quality of anger. It is to be concluded that while conceiving a child, one's mind must be very sober and devotional. For this purpose, the Garbhodhan Samskara is recommended in the Vedic scriptures. If the mind of the father is not sober, the semen discharge will not be very good. Thus, the living entity wrapped in the matter produced from the father and mother will be demoniac, like Hiranyaksha and Hiranyakashipu. The conditions of conception are to be carefully studied. This is a very great science. Om Jnana Timrandasya Gananjana Shalakaya Chakshun Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shri Vasadi Gaur Bhaktivinoda Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. So, in this verse and purport, we're learning the importance of having mothers and fathers whose consciousness is at a very high level when they're conceiving children. This is the point that's being discussed here. Otherwise, the quality of the children that are produced is going to be low. And technically, in Sanskrit, it's called Varna Shankara, unwanted population. And John Lennon once said that most people are born out of a bottle of whiskey on Saturday night. So that results in a very low-grade kind of population. Now, Srila Prabhupada has mentioned several times in his teachings that in this age of Kali, the Garbhadan samskara is not really being performed. That was kind of, that ceremony was required in order for there to be, especially among the Brahminical class of people, a proper type of birth would take place. But since that's not being performed in the age of Kali, the population is mostly of low quality. Kalau Sudra Sambhavat. In the age of Kali, everyone by birth is born Sudra, but by performing different sacrifices, one is able to be elevated to the platform of a Brahmana. Now, early in the Krishna consciousness movement, one of Srila Prabhupada's female disciples wrote to him a letter and kind of asked these kinds of questions. Well, what is this Garbhadan samskara? And are we carrying it out? So Srila Prabhupada instructed in a letter to this devotee. He said, you've asked some questions about sex life and Krishna consciousness, and that should only be engaged in when there's the intention to have a child. And he gave some very specific directions, when the time for that is. And said, and on that day when there's the intention to conceive a child, should chant, the husband and wife should chant 50 rounds of japa. Now, I don't know how many times he repeated that instruction, but that instruction was there. So that was his version of Garbhadan Samskara for devotees in the Krishna consciousness movement. He said, it's not really possible to reintroduce all the Vedic practices, in this current day and age. So, it's stated, Har Nama, Har Nama, Har Nama Vikevalam Kalau Nasteva 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 Gatiranyata. That in this age of Kali, the only means of deliverance is the chanting of the Hare Krishna mantra, the Sankirtan movement of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. And by that practice, people are being raised to the Brahminical platform. So even great personalities like Kashyapa Muni and his wife Diti, we're learning here, they can get into a state of consciousness that is not proper, so that at the moment of conception, these demoniac entities who were really playing a role, sort of, but they were actually servants of Lord Narayan from Vaikuntha. But as part of this pastime that Krishna wanted to carry out, they took birth in this way. So, and as a result, later on, Prahlad Maharaj was born, a great devotee of the Lord. So many things were accomplished through this pastime. But an important point to consider is that we don't have just the soul and the gross material body. We have a subtle material body made of mind, intelligence, and false ego. And according to the state of the subtle material body, one takes a particular kind of birth. So in terms of the ordinary conditioned soul, Hiranyaksha and Hiranyakashipu were a special case of devotees who had come down from Vaikuntha by the arrangement of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. But for an ordinary conditioned soul, their birth, once they're in the material world, their birth is kind of determined by their mental state, the state of their subtle body at the time of death. Krishna explains that in Bhagavad Gita. Whatever state one has, whatever the state of one's mind is at the end of one life, will determine what the next body will be. So, it's kind of interesting. It depends on the state of the mental state, the state of the subtle material body of the living entity and the state of mind at the time of conception of the parents that conditioned soul is going to take birth in, the family is going to take birth in. So if the state of consciousness, the state of the subtle material body of the parents is in a lower mode, that will attract a soul that's in that lower mode to take birth as their child. So it's kind of depends on both things, what the state of the subtle material body of the potential child is going to be, and what the state of the subtle material bodies, the mental state of the parents is at the time of conception. That kind of determines what sort of child will take birth as a result of that. And this subtle material body, at the time of death, the soul leaves the gross physical body, but it's accompanied by the subtle material body of mind, intelligence, and false ego, and some other things as well, the subtle material senses. So that same subtle material body stays with the soul for the entire time that it's in the material world. So we may take on unlimited numbers of gross physical bodies in different species. It's not guaranteed that if one has a human body in this life, that one is necessarily going to have a human body in the next life. We can see even examples of devotees who have had to take, like Maharaj Bharat, he had to take a birth as a deer. And if one isn't, such an elevated devotee, if one goes back to a deer body, it may take many lifetimes for one to come back up to the human form. So there's a process of you could say the evolution of a soul, that it goes through different forms of embodiment until it comes back to the human form. And then in the human form, it actually has the ability to make proper choices, to use its intelligence in the proper way so that it can become liberated from this whole cycle of birth and death. Janma mrityu jara vyadhi dukkha doshana darshanam, that any body within the material world, whether it's a body of a demigod on a higher planet or the body of a human being on this earth planet, or the body of a plant or an animal or an insect, fish, whatever, they're all subjected to birth, death, old age, and disease. And Srila Prabhupada mentioned a few times that just like we can't prevent death, we can't prevent birth either. They try in so many ways to control the process of birth. they make different laws about, abortion and contraception and things like that, but they can't prevent birth from taking place, ultimately. Somehow or other, if they prevent the birth of a conditioned soul in a body, that just means, that conditioned soul is going to have to take birth somewhere else at some other time. So it's not really doing what they want to do. But to get back to this evolution of the soul, it may pass through many different types of bodies until it comes again to the human form, where it has the opportunity to become liberated from the whole cycle of birth and death. And that's actually what this whole universe is for. Scientists today think it's just an accident. There's no purpose behind the universe. It's just happened as a result of some fluctuation of some particle in the quantum mechanical vacuum. They have all kinds of speculative theories about it. But actually, it's an opportunity that Krishna has provided for us to do either one of two things: try to enjoy ourselves separately from him and chase after material sense gratification in its different forms, or to take advantage of the human form of life and make progress in going back home, back to Godhead, to be in a situation that's beyond all of this birth, death, old age, and disease, and the accompanying miseries. So the being able to control the gross physical body by engaging it in devotional service, the activities of devotional service that Srila Prabhupada has kindly given us. The activities of coming to the temple, worshiping the deities, taking prasadam, having the opportunity to engage our physical bodies in service. Of course, the body is just a collection of senses. We've got our working senses, our voice, our hands, our legs, our organs of evacuation and reproduction. And that's what's being described here, engaging the bodily senses connected with reproduction in devotional service. So, of course, Kashyapa and Diti weren't exactly doing that, but we're advised, if we want to use that set of senses, that procreative ability that's there in the human form of life, if we choose to use it, it can be done in devotional service. And Krishna says, Dharma Viruddho Kamosmi, that I am sex life that's not contrary to religious principles. So otherwise, one should refrain from using the senses in that way. But this is what the human life is formed for, to use the senses in devotional service. And we have varieties of senses. So those are the working senses that make up the activity of the gross physical body, but there are also the subtle material senses, the knowledge acquiring senses that are grouped around the mind. So Krishna advises that all of the senses of the gross material body and subtle material body should be used in his service. And actually controlling the mind is like the leader of the senses. According to the state of the mind, the senses act. So, Savaimana Krishna Padarvindayo, the mind should always be situated at the lotus feet of Krishna. Mamanusmara Yudhya Cha. Krishna instructed Arjuna, keep your mind on me, think of me, and fight. In other words, engage in some practical devotional service and remember Krishna at the same time. That can be done even in the case of having children, but one has to be in the proper mentality. So that is the perfection of the evolution of consciousness, the evolution of the soul, to attain the human form of life and use it properly. And the result will be that one will go to the spiritual world in the next life, in the next existence, and be freed from the cycle of birth and death. Of course, it's possible for one to remain in this material world as a pure devotee of Krishna. Lord Chaitanya would sometimes pray in that way that even I may be taking birth and death in this world, but just let me serve Krishna. Of course, that's a higher mentality, to remain in the material world for the purpose of delivering the conditioned souls. But we should, in our stage at least, aspire for returning to the spiritual world. So, in a sense, Darwin was right in the sense that there is something connected with living things that modifies lifetime after lifetime. He thought it was the gross physical body that is modified, but actually it's the subtle material body that he wasn't aware of that is actually modifying. Like we have the same subtle material body for our entire stay in the material world, and it changes by our desires. So as our desires change and modify over vast cycles of time, the type of physical body that we get actually changes. It's not that the bodies are changing one from the other, one to the other. The bodies are fixed by Krishna. They're always available. And according to the state of our subtle material body of mind, intelligence, and false ego, we get a particular type of body in a particular sequence. As I said, until we get to the human form, which is the opportunity to get out of the whole process. So Darwin's intuition was correct. There is something that's modifying over time, and it's the subtle material body. So Srila Prabhupada said it's very important for devotees who are engaged in a service connected with science to demonstrate the existence of the subtle material body. He said from that, everything else will follow. You know, the soul, everything else. So here in this verse, we're seeing how because the mentality of Kashyapa and Diti was not in the appropriate state, they received as children Hiranyaksha and Hiranyakashipu. You know, said his mentality was very powerful, but it was tinged with anger, which is a symptom of the mode of ignorance. So those are some thoughts about today's verse and purport. Any comments or questions? Okay, questions first. Is it a question or a comment? Okay.
Thank you for a very insightful and illuminating class, Drutakarma Prabhu. I have just, the question I have is that you mentioned in the early part of your class, and if I overlooked it, my apologies, but you mentioned the Garbhadan Samsara. You mentioned it, but I think some of us don't know what that is. So if you would be so helpful to describe what is done there, which will prevent a bad or no good birth. That's why it's given.
Yes. According to the Vedic system, there are 10 sacrifices or samskaras that are performed at different key events in life, like conceiving a child being the first one. And there were those who were twice born were expected to perform this sacrifice. And I haven't seen Srila Prabhupada give all the details of everything that was involved in this particular Garbhadan Samskara. Garbha means womb and Dan means to give something, so it has to do with conception. And when a person in the twice-born categories, Brahmin, Kshatriya, and Vaishya, when a couple was to conceive a child, they performed this samskara, and Srila Prabhupada mentions many times it was public. It was kind of announced, you know, that on this day, this couple is going to conceive a child, and there were witnesses to it, Srila Prabhupada said, so they could be sure, yes, this child was born of these parents, or conceived by these parents. And that, Srila Prabhupada said, was considered to be the birthday of the child. It's the day of conception. So it was, like I said, in his books, he doesn't give all the details of that, but he does say that in the present age, we can't perform all these Vaidika or Vedic samskaras. So therefore we follow the Pancharatriki Vidhi rather than the Vaidika Vidhi. And in that way we can, even though we're from lower births, we can be raised to the Brahminical platform by the Pancharatriki methods. So, I don't know, do you have anything to add to that?
Just one point. The only thing that I remembered that Prabhupada mentioned is that before two devotees who wanted to have a child, that they would they would first chant the Hare Krishna mantra 64 rounds. And then after that having been done, they would engage in sexual intercourse, because there would have come a tremendous purification through the 64 rounds done properly, and that they would be in a position to attract a higher, a greater, a better type of personality, as opposed to simply engaging in sexual intercourse without any pre-trial, so to speak.
Yeah, well, yes, I think I did mention that Prabhupada had specifically written to a devotee 50 rounds, but maybe he said elsewhere 64. But, that's something I think I mentioned, that is...
I may have not heard it, and my apologies for that. But anyway, whether it's 50 or 64, you've done a lot to attract better or higher types of souls to the two couples.
Yeah, I was going to ask if any of our householder parents had anything to say, but I can't speak with great authority about it, because I never exercised that option. Anything else? Oh, okay.
Hare Krishna Prabhu, thank you very much for nice class. My question is, when we talk about that there is many species of humans, so to say species is the same than races, like this race, that race, or is different?
Well, in the Srimad Bhagavatam, there is one verse where it says there is one human species on this planet. So, and Srila Prabhupada often said, I'm not, he didn't identify racially, I'm black, I'm white, I'm this, I'm that, or even in terms of nationality, that's not there. But there are different kinds of human-like beings that exist in different parts of the universe, and maybe even on this planet, but like the Vanaras, who had ape-like bodies but human-like intelligence. They could speak, and they had a lower level of culture and technology than the humans. Like in Ramayana, we read about the monkey soldiers. They had language. Of course, they fought with tree trunks and stones and things like that, rather than the kinds of weapons that were used by the more human-like beings that were also described. So there are different types of human-like forms. Of course, we use the word species, but that's not a Vedic term. I think the Vedic term is jata, means a different type of form of something that has taken birth. So, how the Vedic concept of these different types of bodily vehicles matches up with modern scientific concepts about species is, they may not be exactly the same. And, even among, scientists, they define species in many different ways. It's a big problem in biology. So, it's also like a sensitive issue because, at some point in European history, they classified humans of different races as different species, and it's so it's kind of like a sensitive issue. Like, if you said, well, people of this race are not human, that would that wouldn't be a good thing. Because especially in terms of Krishna consciousness, we say it doesn't matter if you're black, white, yellow, red, brown. Doesn't matter if you're Russian, English, American, Chinese, or man or woman or whatever. You're a spirit soul. Ultimately, that's what your identity is. And we shouldn't make distinctions based on superficial characteristics of, the material, gross and subtle material bodies. So, anything else? Yes?
Thank you for your class. I had a question, and this may be an obvious question, but is it when the living entity leaves the physical body and is covered by the subtle body, is it the Paramatma who directs that living entity to the next womb?
It's stated karmana daiva netrena jantur dehopapataye. That means by one's karma, which would include the state of one's subtle material body, and daiva, divine influence. So yes, both things are involved, the state of one's subtle body and the Paramatma or the super soul. They determine what the next body will be. Karmana daiva netrena, by one's karma and by divine arrangement. These things are going on. So thank you for bringing that up. Anything else? Okay, Srila Prabhupada ki jai.